Bureau is no different than American Farm Bureau. We start or any county farm bureau across the 50 states and Puerto Rico. We start our meetings on time. I want to welcome everybody to this week's Shop Talk. The last couple of weeks, you've been in, my background has been my shop, but this is more water this time. So in the background, we've got some great Minnesota water, and the reason that's on there, and as I introduce our American Farm Bureau President, Zippy Duval, there's a lot of things I could say about Zippy, and a lot of things I certainly would, but I want to be brief to have time for our two speakers today. But the picture behind me is a barge tow on the Mississippi River, but there's a story to that. Actually, it's just a screenshot of a video I took as we were on the river getting close to these barges. And I want to start the story a little bit about the fact that as soon as Zippy was elected, I was fortunate at that time to be chair of the American Farm Bureau Trade Committee, and talking about international trade and the importance of that. And it was at that very same annual meeting that President Duval was elected that he asked me shortly after he was elected. He said, says, I got to get up to Minnesota. I want to talk to you guys about that Mississippi River. He says, I know you guys in the Midwest, that river is awful important to us, and in trade and barges and things like that. And coming from Georgia, it's maybe not something on top of mind. And this was actually that trip that Zippy took to Minnesota. We were on the river with Lee Nelson, hooking up onto the barges. We saw that. So I thought today, President Duval with a water background and water topics, that would be the right screen. So before I turn it over to you, Mr. President, I just want to remind everybody that everybody is currently on mute. But there will be time for questions. So whether you use the question and answer feature on your device, whether you use the chat feature, whether you raise your hand, if you're listening on a cell phone as a conference call, you'll need to hit *9 to be put into the queue for questions. So a little bit of the housekeeping as we get started. And with that, it's my great honor to have our first guest speaker being the president of the American Farm Bureau, Zippy Duval. Welcome, Mr. President, to Minnesota Farm Bureau Shop Talk, and I would ask for some comments, please.
Sure, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate the invitation to be part of this. Shop Talk in Minnesota is the same version of a tailgate breakfast in Georgia that I used to do. So we meet across the state in different areas of the state and have provide a sausage, biscuit, and coffee, and have a breakfast tailgate discussion. So I'm kind of proud to see you doing these shop talks. I think they're very valuable. Stay in touch with our grassroots. I was asked to talk about my experience with COVID, and also talk about how organization has adapted to the COVID environment. So I see you've frozen up on me, Kevin. Can y'all hear me?
I can hear you fine, and we've got some broadband bandwidth things, so I just took my video off. But are we okay, Amber? Is everything working? On my Facebook feed, I'm just seeing a dark screen.
Yep, it works. It's looking good on my end.
Perfect.
Good. I just didn't want to rattle on for 10 minutes and nobody get to hear me. So, so I appreciate the opportunity and let me check that out. So first off, my personal experience with COVID, I'm sure most or all of y'all know that I came down with the COVID virus, COVID-19, back early in July. And I'll tell you, it is real. It is real, and I'm 64 years old. And I would say in my lifetime, I've been sick pretty bad 3 times, and this was one of those 3. So if you're one of those that kind of think it's all political and it's not a whole lot to it, I would suggest you think it differently. And I will tell you that every time I left my house and went to town, I got out of my truck, if I was going to be in Home Depot or Lowe's or in an eating place, I wore a mask. I'd done all the things I was supposed to be doing. But you know, the president describes this virus as the invisible enemy. And I really didn't think about that until that invisible enemy hit me on July the 3rd when my son showed up. All my children came home for 4th of July. We never expect our children to bring something home like that. But he came in on Friday, hugged me, and we had a great Friday and Saturday and Sunday morning. He got a call from one of his coworkers, said that he had been diagnosed positive with COVID. The very next day, 3 days after my son was exposed, he came down with symptoms. That was after he had visited with me, and he was tested positive. The very next day, I came down with symptoms, and the next day I was positive. So, out of a very innocent family gathering, it came to us through one of our family members by way of his workplace, and so you never know who you're bumping shoulders with, or shaking hand with, or hugging, whether it's in your family. You never know where they may have picked it up. And even at his work, they were wearing masks and everything. Supposedly, the person that brought it into his workplace had been to a baseball tournament and picked it up there and brought it to his workplace. So you never know where it's going to be. So all the precautions still may not protect you, but just don't take for granted it might not, that it won't come in on your family, because it can. It happened to me that way. And fortunately, I've gotten through it. I'm back. I'm not 100% on my strength, but everything else is straightened out. I feel good. If I could just get all my strength back, I'll be back to 100%. I never quit working. Kevin, to tell you, one of my worst weeks I had in it, we had cancel a president meeting, and I stayed with it and dug through it, but it was a challenge. So I hope the presidents could, and I'm sure they understood the situation I was in. So it is real, and we should be taking all the precautions that we can. Now, as far as an organization, I knew early on that we were going to have to do things different. When we sent everybody home from Washington to work from home, you know, a lot of our positions can do that, and really and truly in this process, we're going to be evaluating, are there positions that can be working from home to be more economical on what it costs us to run the organization. We'll be looking at those. But some of our positions are key positions that need to be in place in Washington. But of course, there's really nowhere you can go in Washington to visit or talk. So we still do everything on the phone or on the computer. But I knew that we were going to have to change the way we do it. I was real concerned about losing touch with our grassroots. And of course, our direct line to our grassroots is our state farm bureaus. So what I did, I asked the staff in every department to set up a weekly or bi-weekly call, whatever that the state departments in the same areas would prefer, back to our states to talk about what issues were our farmers facing in those states. And when those issues come forward, how do we find solutions in American Farm Bureau to try to assist our state farm bureaus, making sure that our farmers' lives were as normal as they could be, and attempt to solve some of the problems that COVID brought along with it. So every Wednesday I had a Farm Bureau state presidents call. It wasn't limited to presidents. They were the one that really participated in it. We had guests from USDA, the White House, all over Washington. We basically used the meeting to bring Washington back to our states in a time that we couldn't travel and be in Washington ourselves in person. So I think that was very beneficial. And at the end of each one of those meetings, I gave the presidents the opportunity to bring forward the issues that you were facing in your state. And Kevin participated all of them and did a good job representing y'all. So that was a key meeting for us to hear those issues. On Fridays, Paul Slagle, who runs our policy department, had national affairs calls with all the state national affairs people. On Thursday, Margie, who runs our program work at American Farm Bureau, talked to all the departments back in the state about programs and how do we keep people involved. On Tuesdays, we had Terry Moore, who runs our communications department, talking to all our state communications departments, and making sure that we were attempting to fix their problems and making sure your stories were getting out, and they did a tremendous job doing that. And then every other Monday, Dale Moore and myself met with all the state administrators, making sure that administratively we were covering all our bases, making sure that other states knew how some states were dealing with some of the issues administratively. So all those meetings, and that's just a sample of them, have really went a long ways in making sure our communication lines have stayed open, and that your needs have had attention drawn to it, whether it was through USDA, EPA, or up on Capitol Hill, so and even the White House. So just to touch a little bit on policy, of course, just about all the issues, 98% of the issues we dealt with since March has been around the COVID virus, and we worked really hard on making sure that the COVID packages, the care package in the CFAP program had as much money as we could get into it. We played a major role with USDA in how they decided to pay that money out. And of course, you can't develop a program like that over a 3 or 4 week period and be able to hit everybody, make everybody totally happy. But really and truly, in hindsight, I look at what the secretary did and how he took input from all of us. I think they've done a tremendous job of pulling something off really, really quick. And then they came back with the opportunity for us to give them examples of the areas that hadn't been touched in CFAP, and they delivered those back out and changed some of the qualifications, added some more commodities to it just here recently, and which will also help a lot more of our farmers across America. So we've had a front seat with USDA and this administration to make sure those monies got back to you. I will tell you our main concern now is, and if you don't remember anything else out of what I say today, I hope you hear this. In the CFAP cost benefit analysis, John Newton just sent me this morning, and he may have mentioned it to y'all several weeks ago when he talked with y'all, but there's $15.4 billion in CFAP, and only 6.8 billion have been sent out in assistance to agricultural producers. That's 44% of the total dollars that are in there. And that really concerns me because we're down to about 3 weeks left until the deadline. Now, the commodities, just for example, the commodities, the support for the commodities, only 20% has went out to hogs. That's anticipated to go out. Upland cotton, 49%, dairy 47%, soybeans 51%, wheat 60%, corn 66%, cattle 69%. And then in the specialty crop area, only $270 million went out, which only represents 12% of what was estimated to go out in payments in CFAP to the specialty crops. So, you know, in other areas, oranges 2%, carrots 1%, tomatoes 6%, apples 10%, strawberries 11%, potatoes 24%. You know, the list just goes on and on of lack of participating. Now, why is that happening? One, specialty crops in a lot of those areas have never dealt with USDA. So it's an issue of not really knowing how to do it, whether or not my commodity is covered or not. And then in the other areas that we're used to doing business in that, I don't have an explanation for that. But I will tell you, when we start talking about the Senate side package and $20 more billion being put in there to help us, there are critics around town saying, well, you've only dispersed 44% of the first package. Is that an indication that we really don't need it? No, it's not. It's an indication that we have a communication problem, and it's an indication that people are not familiar with having using the program. But no, agriculture needs this money. So our critics are out there saying, why more money? Because you're not even using the money that's been put out there. So I hope you'll remember that, and I hope that your county farm bureaus will work hard on making sure our farmers participate because they have less than 3 weeks left. We are in the process right now asking USDA to extend that deadline because we think there needs to be some informational, promotional work done with our farmers to make sure that everybody's getting in. Just hit really high PPP with Small Business Administration. We want to make sure that our farmers will be able to use that. We've had a lot of success there. We had a lot of success early on with labor issues where they shut down the consulates, and we worked with the administration. I had personal meetings with people at administration to make sure that they understand how important that workforce was. We were able to tear down some barriers there. We did have some problems early on, but we were pretty much able to work through that. We're still looking at what happened to the big difference in the price that beef and pork were getting on the boxed meat side, the processed side, versus what farmers were receiving. And of course, we all saw USDA's report and that came out a couple of weeks ago. And of course, the Justice Department is still doing their investigation. We're still hoping we're going to find something. Now, I will tell you, organizationally, I have asked, I think it's 10 presidents led by Scott Vander Wal to look into this issue. So they're in the middle of our own type of investigation so that we might put forth something that even some of your county leaders might read to kind of feed information to them as to maybe the grassroots might want to make some policy changes or recommendations. So we are trying to make sure that we pay attention there. And then of course the processing area, and I know where hogs are big in Minnesota, and the processing area was a huge challenge. We worked with the president on the executive order to make sure that we worked with local governments to get those plants back open. Of course, the number one thing on all our mind, the first thing we have to do is make sure those workers are protected and do everything we can do to keep them healthy and their families healthy. Of course, that, you know, for anybody to think any differently, they were just trying to paint us in a bad picture. So just that is just a very high level of what we did as far as policy. One other area I want to talk to you on a little bit more was communications, because I got a big thank you to your state Farm Bureau for working with us in all the states. But we started the hashtag Still Farming. We had a lot of consumers going to the stores and seeing empty shelves. They were panicking that there wasn't enough food. Of course, we all know there was plenty of food. There was just some kinks in the food chain, going from food services to everyone buying their food in grocery stores. And really and truly, if you look back over the 3 or 4, 5, 6 weeks that our food chain had to adjust, it's pretty amazing they adjusted as fast as they did. So we started this hashtag Still Farming. We touched over 26 million people in that. 2 out of every 5 Americans saw those discussions about still farming on that hashtag Still Farming. We were successful because your State Farm Bureau communications areas were great partners in pushing that stuff out. And that just shows to me when we all work together, we're stronger and we can do so many good things about that. We had 22,000 media mentions from March to June. That's almost unheard of to get that many mentions in media in Washington, D.C. So we also did a poll through Morning Consult, trying to see where the consumers were on what they were thinking about agriculture. I'll bring 2 things to the top. One was 85% of the people polled across America still trusted agriculture, still felt like that agriculture was doing a good job. They were very supportive in agriculture receiving additional monies to be able to help them get through COVID. The other point I'll bring forward is one that we've been talking for years and years and years that agriculture was really a national security issue. So we asked the people, do you think it's a national security issue? And 59%, and I was really surprised because, you know, everybody has told us that didn't really relate to consumers, but 59%, almost 60%, said that they did think agriculture was a national security issue, which tells me they're more in touch now than they've ever been. And now is the time for us to use our communications department to capitalize on those feelings and understanding that the consumer has about agriculture that they never had before. So I'm into this about 15 minutes, and I'm going to stop right there. I could share with you for an hour or two, Kevin, about all the things you did, but I want to say thank you to Kevin and his staff, because they've been great partners through all this, and the more we work together, the better we are.
Well, thank you, President Duvall, and I'm really appreciative you've got your sense of taste back, because this is that time of year where all of us, you included, would be tasting those Minnesota Hormel pork chops on a stick and pancakes on Farm Bureau Day at Farm Fest, and we're all kind of doing that virtually, but we know that we hopefully will get a chance to see you next year at Farm Fest in person. I'm not sure if you've heard yet or not, but a little bit, not breaking news, but Minnesota's pretty proud. We've got our Sarah Kushel from Minnesota, a former American Farm Bureau YF&R committee member, this morning at Farm Fest, after Sherry Saylor, our Women's Committee Chair on the AFBF board, was announced that Sarah is our Farm Fest Woman of the Year. And I know Sarah is not on video. She's busy doing some other things, but I do believe she's listening. So on behalf of Minnesota Farm Bureau, want to congratulate her, and I'm willing to bet you'd like to congratulate her as well.
I would. Congratulations on a job well done, and really, really deserving of the recognition.
Well, thank you again, President Duvall, for all you have done for agriculture and Farm Bureau, and all you'll continue to do, and the great team. You know, that's the one thing with Farm Bureau. We've got a great team, whether it's our county leaders, the state leaders, the staff at local, state, or national levels are second to none. So we really appreciate your time and your commitment to agriculture, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your shop talk today, and thank you for the invitation. Be glad to come back anytime.
Appreciate that. Our next speaker is Warren Formo, is no stranger to many in agriculture, depending on what organization or what part of agriculture in. Warren is all things water we're going to talk about today. Certainly water is important, not only to agriculture, but to every American. And there's a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of myths, a lot of other things. So at this point, I'd like Warren to tell us what we need to know about water in Minnesota. Warren Formo, please.
Very good. Well, thank you, Kevin, for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here this afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm looking forward to a bit of a discussion about how we measure and respond and communicate about agricultural stewardship and some of the challenges that we have. Josie, are you able to get my screen up there?
Warren, you can go ahead and hit share screen, and you should be able to control it on your end. Yep.
Very good. There we go. So I want to talk about some of these challenges that we have. And as I get started, let me, as a caveat, first say I'm going to gloss over some of the just the everyday things we take for granted, because I know that many of you listening are farmers, and you're doing a lot of amazing things on your farm that we could talk about all afternoon. What I want to do today is take a little bit of a different approach and perhaps introduce some ideas that aren't often considered in this whole stewardship discussion. And just a comment about the picture I've got there on the first slide. This is a photo from West Central Minnesota. It's a photo that we had taken for us as part of our communication efforts related to Discovery Farms. And we use it in a lot of our material. And what I like about it is the fact that if you look at that, you kind of see the whole picture of what we're trying to strive for here in Minnesota. You've got the bins in the top of some farm buildings in the background. You've got a beautiful field on a rolling landscape. Got some grass, whether it's CRP or a buffer to protect that wetland area, and a wetland complete with a family of swans. And at the time we had this photo taken, the farmer there indicated that that pair of swans, and he's assuming it was the same pair, had been back numerous years to raise a family there, and he was very proud of that. And I think it just symbolizes the stewardship ethic and is a good way to capture the fact that habitat, water, and agriculture can really coexist. So we'll move on. I'm seeing a bit of a lag here. There we go. Now I've clicked a couple times, so it may move on us again. But first I want to talk about some land use trends. One of the criticisms leveled at agriculture is often simply the fact that we use a lot of land for agricultural production. And so I wanted to share some statistics. We've known for a long time, in fact, that global number of 12% of land used for crop production hasn't changed for a long, long time. And really it's an indication that due to climate, soils, you can only farm in certain places. And then as you follow through, you see that here in the United States, our number's a little bit higher than the global percentage. And here in the Midwest, it gets higher yet because quite simply, we are blessed with some of the best productive farmland on the planet. And so our number is kind of in the middle of the range. If you were to look at other Midwest states, some are a little higher than that, some are a little lower. But about 43% of Minnesota's land is used for crop production. And there should be an asterisk there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But recognize that one of our most popular conservation programs is the Conservation Reserve Program. And in order to be in that program, it has to be eligible cropland. And so in Minnesota, about 1.1 million acres of that 22.6 million is in CRP currently. And so recognize that our actual, the actual amount of land used for crop production is right around 40%. So what are the trends in cropland production used for crop production in Minnesota? And you can see here over the last 20 years, we've been declining. The first 10 years a little faster than more recently, but fact is our cropland base is declining. And so what we see in Minnesota, whether it's converted to development or whether it's retired permanently through some type of program like CREP or some other easement, we are having a smaller footprint. And so for those concerned simply about how much land is being used, we can respond and show them some of those changes. Now, that's not all a positive story. We also need to talk about continuing to be able to meet the needs people have for food. And certainly it's going to take a fair amount of land to continue to do that. So as we think about some of the things that agriculture and farmers are recognized for, here are some that currently we know that these are on kind of top of mind, or some of the first things that often those outside of agriculture, when they think about what farmers are doing, these are the things that they would bring up. We've mentioned CRP, and land retirement is recognized as a way to reduce our agricultural footprint, but it also comes with a cost. And so the hope is, and I think those of us within agriculture talk about this a great deal, is the hope is that the acres chosen to retire are the right ones, meaning the most marginal, most risky, both from an economic and an environmental point of view. And so we need to remind folks that because we are able to be very productive on where we do produce, we are able to, we have the luxury to retire some land and set it aside. And so I think that's an important program, and certainly it receives a lot of support from landowners here in Minnesota. You'll recognize or remember that previous farm bills had, a previous farm bill had reduced the acreage cap nationally, and so we saw a decline in CRP acres. Often that is used as kind of a measure of stewardship. And I like to remind folks that even during those years where acreage was declining because it had to as a result of the acreage caps, here in Minnesota, every enrollment period, we had more acres offered, indicating a great amount of landowner interest in the program than could be accepted into the program. And so I think our landowners and farmers value that one quite highly. The next couple are examples of things that we're talking a great deal about, not only for water quality, but also thinking about soil health. And in Minnesota, we often hear farmers do too much tillage and they're not interested in cover crops. And I think two pieces of information that came out of the 2017 NRCS Census of Agriculture show that we do see a lot of interest in both of those topics. Cover crop acreage is increasing fast. A lot of farmers, a lot of you are experimenting and figuring out ways to make cover crops work. And similarly with tillage, we're seeing big increases, especially in strip till here in Minnesota. No till not quite as much, but you can see 1/3 more acres over only a 5-year period that we've seen that change in tillage. Along with that, we see reductions in erosion, just overall improvements in organic matter in the soil. So it's good stuff. And those things we are often recognized for. Now, there are some other things that I want to talk about actually more that are not so well recognized and often overlooked. And so here's a couple of bullet points. First of all, not many people would perhaps agree with me that an increase in irrigated acres is an environmental positive. Similarly, an increase in drained acres, I see it as an environmental positive. And the reason for those two changes are driven largely by economics. Certainly, we know that we need to identify limiting factors. And in Minnesota, we've got a tremendously diverse agriculture, and we've got some soils where the limiting factor is too little water, and those acres can be irrigated. We see other areas where the limiting factor on yields is too often too much water, and drainage is needed. And so I think it's really important to recognize that by fully optimizing and reducing those limiting factors on those acres, again, it contributes to that overall efficiency of production and sustainability that allows then for other acres to not have to be used for production. Related to that, and we all know, you've seen these charts, if you look at long-term yield charts going back to about 1950, they're even steeper up. But I chose these charts in particular because they cover the last 30 years. And you may recognize that in recent years, some have said, well, we've kind of run out of the course on yield increases, and there's not much more on the horizon to help, whether it's genetics or agronomics or whatever. And yet we see this trend is still pretty solid even over the last 30 years. So this is the chart for corn. Here's a very similar chart for soybeans, and another one for wheat over roughly the same time frame. And so I think it's really important to recognize the tremendous role efficiency has in meeting food needs and doing it on as little acreage as possible. And then related to that, a big conversation piece in recent years has been around fertilizer efficiency, and most specifically in Minnesota, nitrogen use efficiency. And so this is data from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and it's not completely current. It ends here in 2016, but the trend here also is pretty solid. And we can see that we've increased, and in this version, what we see here is the bushels of corn produced per unit of fertilizer. And so we've gone from about 0.85 to about 1.3 on that trend line. So we're getting more corn, in this case, out of each unit of fertilizer. I know many farmers, when you talk about nitrogen use efficiency, you will actually divide the fertilizer input by bushels, and so you'll simply get the inverse of those. But regardless of the way you do the math, the trend comes out the same. We're doing better. We're producing more using less, whether you're talking about land or, in this case, nitrogen. In fact, if you look at data from the Department of Agriculture's nitrogen management initiative, they are finding producers who, for this chart, imagine that individual line was up at three bushels of corn per pound of nitrogen input. And so that just kind of shows us what's possible out there, that yeah, on average, we're doing really good, but there still is even more that we could do. So let's talk a little bit about some signs of progress. And often we hear so much, it seems like the negative stories about not making enough progress so heavily outnumber those that show progress. And so I wanted to show you a couple of examples. This is from the Board of Water and Soil Resources. This is a map that's available online that shows primarily activities that are funded through clean water funds, EQIP programs, federal farm bill programs, and that sort of thing. And so this doesn't even capture many of the activities that farmers do completely on their own. But if you're looking at things like if you built a grass waterway or a terrace or a sediment basin, or if you tapped into a federal program to do cover crops, that project is on this map. And you can see the numbers reflecting how many pounds of phosphorus and how many tons of sediment is being prevented from entering our waterways over this time period due to those programs. And note that a lot of those red dots are in agricultural areas. A lot of them are reflecting things that you as farmers are doing. Next up, another view, another line of evidence, if you will, about some of the signs of progress. This is the cover sheet of NRCS's assessment of the conservation practices in the upper Mississippi River Basin. And so you can see the map there. It covers a lot more than just Minnesota, but if you delve into the report, you'll find that the numbers in Minnesota are very similar. And they show in that report, over the last 30 years, sediment down nearly 70%, pesticides down about 50%, similarly with phosphorus. So we're making really good progress. And most important, I think, we are making progress, or we have made progress in areas that during that era, during that time frame, aligned with what many of the federal programs, a lot of the conservation efforts, a lot of education efforts around really focusing on keeping soil in place. And as a result, we see that happening. And when you keep soil in place, you also see reductions in pesticide and phosphorus losses. Yet another view, and I know Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, there's often a lot of anxiety amongst farmers about some of their reports, but let's look at this two-pager. This is a summary from MPCA's strategy to reduce nutrients in water, and it relates to both nitrogen and phosphorus, and it's essentially a long-term goal through 2040 to reduce both nitrogen and phosphorus loads in the Mississippi River in this case. And so I'm going to zero in the next slide on those charts at the bottom. And it might be a little grainy and hard to tell, but on the left side, you see phosphorus loading in the Mississippi River, on the right side, nitrogen. And so you can kind of see the balance between the different categories. And I'll focus mostly on cropland and wastewater because those are the two that represent most of the conversation. Other is sort of uncontrollable landscape contributions. But if you look at that bright green section for cropland, both on phosphorus and nitrogen, and if you look at just from the left side, pre-2000 to where it says current, they're getting smaller. Now, they're not getting smaller as fast as PCA and others would like, but the fact is they're getting smaller. And so I think that is a positive for us. And note that wastewater, it's getting smaller for phosphorus, but has actually gotten larger for nitrogen. So there are concerns there. But then we need to recognize that both agriculture and municipalities face some big challenges, as you notice how sharply those numbers need to decline if we're going to meet those long-term goals. So, given that we've made all this progress that we're looking at, and there are some positive indicators, why do we still have so many water quality problems, especially recently, and especially regarding nitrogen? And I think it's important to recognize that recent rainfall trends are really masking a lot of these improvements. Especially with regard to nitrogen. Nitrogen moves with water, with rainfall. And what we're finding is that these bigger storms really make a big difference. And it's interesting. I remember about 12, 13 years ago during water quality discussions hosted by PCA, a lot of farmers in the room were beginning to see this big rain effect happening on their farms and brought that to the discussion and were told, no, you guys are wrong. It's not raining more. And now fast forward 12 years later, and everybody's talking about the fact that it's raining more. And this is from a more recent PCA fact sheet on load monitoring. And again, I'm going to zip in and focus more on one piece there on the right side where it says water quality monitoring. Again, this is from the PCA fact sheet. Heavy rains can dramatically change water quality in rivers and streams from one day to the next. And so they recognize it. We in agriculture see it. And so it's important to note that. On the left side, I popped in a little press release. This is just from yesterday. Every year in early August, the size of the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico is measured. It's been done for about 40 years now. And it's very interesting that yesterday, the press release said that this was the third smallest size of the hypoxic zone in the last 30 years, in the record, which goes back about 40 years. So that's good news, right? Well, except for this. If you read the whole article, it talks about the fact that it's so small simply because of the wind effect and the mixing from hurricane or tropical storm Hannah. And so it kind of feels like we can't win no matter what, because here is a case where the hypoxic zone models predicted prior to measurement that it would be over 6,000 square miles. It came in at about a third of that, which should really be pretty good news. And yet, and the result, the driver of that was simply weather, a big storm. And so the media is making it sound as though, well, we better not count on this. Maybe not, but the fact is these big storms, and in this case, a hurricane and tropical storm, made a big difference. So again, relating to that idea that one storm makes a big difference, the photo you see there on the left now is from one of our Discovery Farm sites immediately following a big rain. And that water is coming through a flume at the edge of the field, where we are monitoring, measuring, sampling for sediment and nutrients to assess what's leaving these farm fields. So I want to talk a little bit about some of our Discovery Farms data and what it shows relative to this precipitation and large events masking our progress. This is a chart that shows all the years. We started the program, we started in 2010, and so we led into 11, and that's what we call our first water year. Notice on the right side, it starts in 2011 as we had our first farms were just surface drained. In 2012, we added some farms with tile drainage. So the blue bars represent runoff duration. How many days in each year did runoff happen on us, or did tile flow happen on those tile drain fields? The orange bars are how many days in a year did surface runoff happen? And you can see, especially in the last 4 years, we've been above 200 days of tile flow each year. And the numbers for surface flow really haven't changed all that much in terms of when or how many days we get. We're still in that 11, 12, 13 range. So what we're noticing is that these soils are saturated much more often. That's what other research shows as well. And so we're experiencing these much longer, higher number of days with tile flow. So what does that mean? Well, here is the inches of runoff normalized across acres. So when you look at the blue, that's how many acre inches of water came off of those fields in those years. And you can see that it, on average, ranged from about 1.4 up to over 8 last year. So a lot of variability. On the right side, you see surface runoff. And again, the numbers are a little bit lower. On average, across our system, we see that tile runoff averages about 4.5 inches and surface runoff about 2.6 inches per year. So we are seeing more through tile. But if you think about the number of days that it happens, it shows you that that sponge effect is real. We're seeing more water, but we're seeing it over as much as 200 days rather than over 10 to 12 days. And so it helps alleviate and mitigate some of the big flows that people are concerned about in our waters. Here's a similar chart, and this shows nitrogen losses through those systems as well. And you can note that, and we know this, research confirms on many University of Minnesota and other Midwest experiment farms that our primary pathway of nitrogen loss from in our current agronomic systems is through tile. And so we know that. The numbers here show the average ranging from as low as 8 pounds per year up to about 30 pounds per year. The numbers are lower in surface runoff simply because often that surface runoff hasn't interacted with the soil as much, so it hasn't had the opportunity to pick up nitrogen. Nitrate nitrogen is in the soil. When water percolates through, it can pick up that nitrate and carry it to the tile lines. But I think what I wanted you to take away from this slide today is thinking about these big precipitation events, record-setting years where we've seen places in Minnesota get over 60 inches of rain in recent years, how that is driving these numbers. And recognize also that while this is a composite of a whole bunch of farms, and across those farms, like across most farms, we're making slight adjustments each year in how we manage, but not wholesale big changes. And so by and large, these farms were managed very similarly across this time frame. The only explanation for why 2015, the nitrogen loss through tile was 8 pounds, and in 2019, it was nearly 30 pounds, is related to rainfall. And when we share this data, sometimes I've had people challenge me and say, well, we want all the farmers in Minnesota to do what those people did in 2015. The reality, as most of you will know, is they did the same things in 2019. Precipitation and weather patterns were different. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't be trying to address those issues and the drivers of those bigger numbers. It's simply to point out that sometimes, despite our best efforts, despite all the conservation practices and best nutrient management practices that you're putting in place, Mother Nature wins and the numbers kind of get out of our control. So we need to continue to figure out how we can address those issues. That's part of the communication that we need to do with others. It's also something we need to continue to work on within agriculture and with the research community. So with that, just a couple of what I identified as key takeaways, and you may have other questions or comments or views on this as well. But I've identified these 3 areas, which are the 3 areas we tend to get the most questions, and they're nitrogen, sediment, and phosphorus. And the font there indicates the relative scale. We get a lot more concerns, and I think growing concerns about nitrogen. Sediment, yeah, it depends on where you are in Minnesota. If you're in some of the steeper landscapes, we still have concerns, and I know many farmers are doing a lot to address that. But when we communicate with the non-agricultural audiences, it's really important that we help them understand that we're still continuing to work on fine-tuning in some of those areas. Phosphorus, a little smaller font yet, because across Minnesota, we're seeing much less pressure in recent years than we did, say, 6 or 8 years ago. And so I think that's a good thing. I think we need to recognize that the emphasis has simply shifted from one nutrient to another. Also, I think it's really important that we help people understand that efficiency is important. Unless you subscribe to the notion that agriculture isn't important, we need to recognize we're going to produce a lot, and we just simply have to do it as efficiently as we can. And then while we're trying new things and old things, cover crops have been around for generations and generations. And a lot of our learning, a lot of what we're seeing in water quality improvements and conservation practices is simply from watching farmers and what they do. And so I appreciate all the innovation that you're doing. And then finishing on this last point, we don't know that we're going to continue to have these big rains, whether they're big events or big annual amounts in coming years. A lot of the climate predictors tell us that we will. And so I think it's important to continue to look at how your farm is responding. If you're seeing major erosion after a big rain event, drive around and see what are other farmers doing, and are their fields eroding more or less, and are there new innovative things I can try. Many farmers have told me that they've picked up their biggest conservation tricks simply watching their neighbors. So with that, I'll stop and see if there are any questions.
Okay, and I would just remind everybody, whether it's raising your hand using the Q&A function, the chat box, or if you're on a phone, *9 to ask those questions. And I'll maybe start, Warren, with just a quick ask from my perspective. If you had one ask for a Minnesota farmer, you could ask them to do one thing. What would that one thing be, Warren?
Well, that's a great question. And I think I would say it this way. Think about what your biggest water quality or environmental challenge is, because that will then drive what you choose to do to address it, because nobody knows, and I don't think we can say as a blanket statement across Minnesota, here's the thing you need to do. So I think it's just think about and reflect on what your biggest challenge is and then figure out how to address it.
Thank you for that. Again, *9 or the other features. Amber, do we have any questions in the queue?
We do, and it looks like we still have President Duval with us as well. So if you have questions for him, I'm sure he'd be happy to take those too. Warren, the first question is a clarification question. Is land use for crop production, does that include forestry?
No, it does not. No, it does not. This is,
okay.
So if you were to look into NRCS, the Census of Agriculture, this forest lands would be a separate category.
Thank you. The next question says, when Gene Hugesson was Ag Commissioner, he would say that we are losing 1.5 townships a year, or about a county every decade, to development, buildings, roads, etc. How much are we losing now?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't have that number readily available top of my head. I do have those statistics somewhere, but we are seeing a steady increase, especially in the last 2 to 3 years as the economy has rebounded from the 2007-8 period, where we're seeing more development. And I think especially troublesome to me is that we're seeing a lot of development on really prime farmland in that area right around the Twin Cities. And so I think, I don't have a number for you right now, but I think it'll be reflected as year to year. Bowser tracks that. And so that would be one place to look on their website for that information. And then every 5 years, NRCS takes this really detailed snapshot.
We have another question that says, has there been any environmental research done for just the time frame of when stay-at-home order was put into place? And if so, have we seen less environmental issues?
Another good question. I'm sure there has. I have not seen any data, and recognize that most of the time, by the time you, in the water world, by the time you get samples to a lab and then get the data back, it's quite a while. We've continued our Discovery Farms monitoring right through the whole COVID-19 situation, and so we'll have data that we will, I guess we can look at it at the end of the growing season and see if we can perhaps find any differences relating to the year. Good question. We'll keep that in mind.
And I have
President
go ahead, Kevin.
Amber.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, President Duval, from a national perspective, any comments or any thoughts after hearing Warren's presentation from Minnesota?
No, I think it's always interesting for us to look at that data, especially how much participation we have in the conservation programs across our states. And of course, that's one of the things that we try to encourage everybody. The more we participate in these conservation, the more data that we get of all the good work that we're doing will lessen the blow of the future conversations around climate change and sustainability. So there is not enough appreciation with the average consumer or average American about all the wonderful things that we've been doing for decades. And if everybody could look at my farm when my great-grandfather farmed it compared to the way I farm it, they would see the tremendous improvements that's been made just here on my farm, and I'm sure all the farmers listening could say about the same thing. But there's not enough appreciation across America, which tells us that we got to tell our story, and that's part of Farm Bureau.
And there has been a lot of improvement, but the one thing that agriculture, I think, wants to be known for, and that's continual improvement. We're doing things a lot better, but we want to continue to do better. Continual improvement is our goal, and really appreciate Warren and all the research and information we get through Marwalk and the different contacts, whether it be with different agencies and things like that. So sincere thank you, Warren, to you and all you do, not only water quality, but for agriculture in Minnesota.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and not only for providing this opportunity this afternoon, but also for the support. We were formed to do this kind of work about 12 years ago, and one of our founding members, of course, was Minnesota Farm Bureau, and your organization has continued to support us and provide leadership throughout that whole time. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thank you again. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Karen Schaefer, Executive Director of Minnesota Farm Bureau, for some closing comments and a sneak peek of what's happening next week on Shop Talk. Karen, please.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, President Duvall. We wish we could host you here in Minnesota. It's about as beautiful of a week as we get all summer, and the weather's ideal for pork chops and pancakes, and we'll just have to pray for this great weather next year. Thank you, Warren. This is great information. For those that don't know, Warren's a bit of an extension of our team too. We kind of view him as our little step brother in the office, because he's right down the hall and participates in a lot of things in our office. And we just love having his expertise and love the work that Marwak does throughout the year. So join us next week. We actually are going to be talking about rural health care, and we will be having Santo Cruz join us. We also have a couple weeks left, so continue to promote this program. It is aired on Facebook, and also the archives are on the website. And if you have not had a chance to join Farm Bureau, we encourage you to look at your county and local farm bureaus. Also seek out sharing this information with a friend who you think may be interested in this topic or any of the other topics that we've covered over the last 2 months. So have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at noon next Thursday.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and everyone, please stay safe.